Have you ever walked through a museum and paused in front of a stone carving, cold, ancient, silent, only to realize it was once soaked in screams? A chilling thought, isn't it? Now cast your mind further beyond the sterile confines of a gallery, to a city so feared, its very name could silence an entire battlefield. A city where horror wasn't hidden in the shadows, lurking in forgotten alleyways. No, in this place, horror stood proudly, brazenly, etched into the very walls of its grand palaces. This is not a myth whispered in dusty scrolls. This is Nineveh. In the heart of what we now call Iraq, amidst the sun-baked plains, there once stood a metropolis so utterly terrifying, it transformed cruelty into an art form, a veritable science of subjugation. Imagine, if you dare, children at play, their innocent laughter echoing beneath towering structures decorated not with tapestries or frescoes, but with the flayed skins of human beings. Envision lovers, hand in hand, strolling past fountains where not so long ago priests performed unholy rites, their hands bathed in the warm, sticky flow of sacrificial blood. And the kings, the kings of Nineveh. They were not content with mere conquest. They reveled in absolute dominance, drinking their victory wine from the very skulls of their vanquished enemies. It is a tableau of barbarity etched in the annals of time. But to merely label Nineveh as a den of savagery would be to miss a profound and astonishing truth. This is not just a story of unfathomable violence and macabre rituals. No, it is also a story of breathtaking beauty, of unparalleled brilliance, and most remarkably, of a transformation so profound, so utterly improbable, that even time itself seemed to conspire to bury its memory. Because against all odds, something impossible once happened in Nineveh. Something that shattered centuries of ingrained violence, of unyielding brutality with a single potent word: repentance. As we delve into this forgotten empire, you will not merely learn about the rivers of bloodshed that stained its past, the chilling rituals that defined its cults, or the astonishing, terrifying technology of dominance it wielded. No, you are about to bear witness to something far more extraordinary. How a single, reluctant man, afraid, furious, and burdened by a divine command, walked into the very belly of this beast and cracked it open from within. Prepare to unravel the layers of Nineveh's dark history and discover how even the most blood-soaked, seemingly irredeemable place in all of antiquity was, in fact, not beyond the reach of change. What secrets, what profound lessons lie buried beneath the sands of time, waiting to be unearthed? Imagine, if you will, waking each morning not to the gentle chirping of birds, but to the sharp, brutal crack of a whip against unforgiving stone. Picture the air thick with the seemingly incongruous sense of freshly baked bread promising sustenance, yet mingling inextricably with the metallic, cloying stench of blood. This wasn't some isolated nightmare. This was the daily reality in Nineveh, a city where horror wasn't a hidden crime, a whispered abomination, but a proud, visible, and utterly fundamental policy. Nestled strategically on the fertile banks of the Tigris River, Nineveh once gleamed as the undisputed jewel of the mighty Assyrian Empire. Its very presence was a testament to human ingenuity. Walls soaring a staggering 15 meters high, their formidable breadth allowing chariots to thunder atop them in daring races. From a distance, it must have appeared a miracle of ancient engineering, a fortress city defying the very limits of the age. Yet, within those imposing walls, something far more sinister and soul-crushing was being meticulously constructed. An entire civilization forged in the crucible of calculated cruelty. Nineveh didn't merely tolerate violence. It enshrined it, celebrated it as an inherent aspect of its power. From the moment you dared to enter its gates, colossal stone reliefs would assault your senses, not with scenes of pastoral beauty or triumphant conquest, but with graphic, unsparing depictions of public executions. Flayings, impalements, beheadings. These weren't shadowy warnings hidden in the gloom of back alleys. They were state-sponsored art, monumental declarations of absolute power and the terrible consequences of defiance. And yet life in its strange and resilient way persisted. People went about their days. They bartered exotic spices in bustling markets, the air thick with their pungent aromas. They played music, its melodies a fragile counterpoint to the city's grim symphony. They whispered gossip, their hushed tones a subtle rebellion against the omnipresent terror, all while human skins, tanned and grotesque, fluttered from the palace gates like macabre victory banners, a constant, visceral reminder of who truly ruled. The guards, with their steely gazes, weren't there to protect citizens from external threats. Their primary function was to patrol for any tremor of dissent, any flicker of defiance in the eyes of the subjugated. What truly set Nineveh apart, distinguishing it from countless other brutal empires throughout history, wasn't just its brutality. It was the chilling pride with which that brutality was enacted and preserved. Every agonizing act of violence, every meticulous torture, every calculated humiliation, was not only executed but rigorously catalogued by royal scribes, etched into countless clay tablets with an unnerving, almost scientific precision. The more grotesque the act, the more it was glorified, celebrated as a testament to the king's unyielding power. The kings of Nineveh didn't merely commit atrocities, they immortalized them, turning their heinous crimes into a legacy etched in stone and clay for all eternity. Most ancient cities, even the most formidable, understood the delicate dance between raw power and a veneer of mercy, a fragile balance that ensured the long-term stability of their dominion. Nineveh, however, scorned this balance. In this empire, pain wasn't merely a consequence, it was the law. Fear wasn't just a tool of control, it was the very currency of the realm, traded in gasps and silent screams. But this chilling overview, this glimpse into the daily horrors of Nineveh, is only the surface. To truly grasp how this empire of agony functioned with such terrifying efficiency, to understand the relentless mechanism that sustained its unparalleled dominance, we must delve deeper into the very heart of its terror. The implacable Assyrian war machine, a force that reshaped the ancient world and whose methods left an indelible stain on the very fabric of history. What horrors, what innovations lie hidden within its gears? Terror in the grand strategy of Nineveh was not a mere byproduct of brutal warfare. No, it was the very essence of their conquest, the meticulously honed point of their imperial spear. While other burgeoning empires of the ancient world might have cautiously expanded their influence through the slow burn of trade routes or the delicate dance of diplomatic overtures, the Assyrians, with chilling foresight, perfected something far more efficient, far more absolute: psychological domination. They grasped with an almost preternatural understanding that fear, when precisely weaponized, held a power that could eclipse 1,000 flashing swords. And so, with an administrative chill that still echoes through history, they made it official. Terror was elevated from a grim necessity to the very bedrock of their state doctrine. Every military campaign launched from Nineveh was meticulously designed not merely to conquer territory or extract tribute, but to traumatize. When the thundering hooves of the Assyrian army were merely rumored to be on the horizon, most cities, anticipating the inevitable, didn't even wait for the first arrow to fly. They surrendered. Why? Because resistance, however valiant, meant being transformed into a grotesque, unforgettable warning. And those warnings, a testament to Assyrian ingenuity and horror, were nothing short of spectacular. Entire cities were not just captured, but systematically razed to the ground, reduced to smoking ruins. The survivors, if any were permitted, were publicly impaled on stakes erected on the outskirts of their desolated homes, their agonizing deaths a stark tableau for all who might approach. Captured leaders, the very embodiment of their people's defiance, were flayed alive, their screaming agony a performance, and their families executed in front of transfixed, horrified crowds. But this was not chaotic savagery born of a momentary bloodlust, far from it. This was bureaucratic and chillingly rehearsed, a macabre, choreographed terror. Royal scribes, with unnerving precision, diligently noted every detail, every scream, every drop of blood. Artists, with equally chilling dedication, immortalized these grotesque moments on stone reliefs, transforming pure horror into monumental propaganda. The Assyrians, masters of the mind as much as the battlefield, even pioneered sophisticated propaganda systems to spread their fear long before their legions arrived. Messengers would gallop ahead of the main army, not to negotiate terms of peace or offer surrender, but to announce in chilling detail precisely what had befallen the last city that dared to resist. These weren't threats. They were promises, delivered with the cold certainty of an executioner. And they worked, spreading a paralysis of fear that often crumbled resistance before it even had a chance to coalesce. Think for a moment of the darkest totalitarian regimes of modern history, where fear permeates every aspect of daily life, from the supposed sanctity of homes to the sterile halls of schools, to the carefully curated narratives of news broadcasts. Nineveh was that world centuries earlier, a chilling prototype where cruelty wasn't a spontaneous act of violence, but a standardized, measured, and meticulously orchestrated spectacle, designed to break the spirit before ever lifting a sword. And at the very nexus of this chilling strategy stood the kings of Assyria, figures who were not merely military leaders, but perceived as living gods, divinely tasked with preserving the empire through absolute, unyielding domination. One such monarch, the infamous Sennacherib, didn't just rule by force. He curated it, refined it, transforming raw power into a finely tuned instrument of psychological warfare. His reign was a masterclass in the systematic application of terror. But the question lingers, a haunting whisper through the ruins. How could such a monstrous system, built on the suffering and subjugation of millions, function so smoothly, so efficiently for so long? To truly unravel this chilling enigma, to understand the grim mechanics of this empire of agony, we need to look beyond the battlefield and the palace walls, delving deeper into the very structure of Ninevite society itself. What insidious mechanisms kept its gears turning, even as they ground its victims to dust? To maintain a kingdom built on the chilling bedrock of fear, you need more than mere indiscriminate cruelty. Such a domain demands organization. It demands precision. It requires a system capable of delivering horror not in chaotic, unbridled savagery, but with a terrifying, almost surgical order. That precisely was the dark genius at the heart of Nineveh's formidable war machine. The Assyrians were far from mindless butchers, driven by a primal lust for blood. On the contrary, they were master engineers of destruction, their minds as sharp as their blades. Their armies stand as a chilling testament to early military innovation, among the very first in history to function with a true, articulated chain of command, a meticulously planned logistics system, and an unceasing drive for battlefield ingenuity. Siege warfare, in many of its most brutal and effective forms, was largely their invention. Imagine, if you will, colossal mobile towers lumbering toward city walls, their heights rivaling the fortifications they sought to breach. Picture reinforced battering rams, massive and relentless, pounding rhythmically against unyielding stone. Envision subterranean sappers silently tunneling beneath the very foundations of enemy strongholds, ready to collapse defenses from below. Each tool, every calculated innovation, was designed to dismantle not just the physical barriers of stone and timber, but more importantly, to crush the very morale of those trapped within. But the true, unyielding weapon in their arsenal wasn't merely their sophisticated tools. It was their unparalleled speed. Mounted couriers, astride specially bred, swift horses, could carry royal orders across hundreds of kilometers of unforgiving terrain in a matter of days, ensuring that the king's will was enacted with frightening immediacy. Supplies were catalogued, transported, and delivered with an almost chilling military accuracy, ensuring that the relentless war machine never faltered. Every soldier knew his precise place within this intricate, terrifying tapestry of conquest. And perhaps most chillingly, every city marked for destruction knew its inevitable fate long before the Assyrian shadow fell upon it. Newly captured territories were not merely occupied. They were absorbed into a brutal, efficient loop of subjugation. The strongest among the defeated were enslaved, their muscles and labor forcibly harnessed to fuel the empire's expansion. The cleverest were conscripted, their intellect and skills bent to the will of Nineveh. The rest, the old, the weak, the defiant, were simply erased, their existence expunged from the annals of time. And with each successive conquest, the empire fed its insatiable appetite. Gold, oxen, grain, and most crucially people, all flowed back to the heart of Nineveh, fueling the engine of terror that propelled its relentless growth. Even the empire's administration mirrored the cold, unyielding precision of its military. Taxation, meticulous record-keeping, and even the very methods of torture were standardized, codified, and applied with chilling consistency. Executioners were not simply brutal thugs, they were trained professionals, masters of their horrific craft. Scribes, the silent witnesses to Nineveh's atrocities, documented everything with dispassionate accuracy, down to the precise number of victims impaled in a given month. This was not random violence, it was systematic, it was calculated. A machine of war refined to perfection, designed never to stop its grinding advance. And while the world watched in abject horror, the Assyrian Empire swelled, gorging itself on the fear and suffering it so deftly cultivated. But this begs a profound, unsettling question. What kind of society, what kind of people could possibly survive, let alone thrive inside such a monstrous machine? Who could flourish under a regime where mercy was not merely discouraged but actively scorned as a fatal weakness, and where surveillance was not just a tool of control, but a constant, suffocating blanket over every aspect of existence? To truly understand the lives lived within this terrible empire, to peer beyond the grand, bloody spectacle of conquest, we need to look behind the imposing palace gates, into the rigid, carefully constructed, and utterly stratified layers of Ninevite society. What hidden currents, what desperate compromises defined life for those who merely existed within this terrifying, inexorable machine? To truly sustain a kingdom built on the bedrock of fear, you need far more than mere indiscriminate cruelty. You require organization. You demand precision. You necessitate a system that delivers horror not in chaotic, unpredictable bursts, but with the cold, relentless regularity of a well-oiled machine. This, then, was the terrifying genius at the heart of Nineveh's war machine. The Assyrians were no mindless butchers driven by savage impulse. They were, in fact, master engineers of destruction, their campaigns meticulously planned and executed with an almost surgical precision. Their armies were among the first in recorded history to boast a true, discernible chain of command, a sophisticated logistics system that kept their forces fed and armed across vast distances, and a relentless drive for battlefield innovation that set new, brutal standards. Siege warfare, for instance, they didn't just practice it, they invented much of it, perfecting the art of dismantling not merely stone walls, but the very morale of their besieged enemies. Imagine mobile siege towers, lumbering giants of wood and iron, slowly conquered territories weren't merely subjugated. They were absorbed into a brutal, self-sustaining efficiency loop. The strongest of the vanquished populations were enslaved, their labor fueling the Assyrian economy. The cleverest, those with skills or knowledge deemed valuable, were conscripted into the very machinery that had crushed them, their talents repurposed for the empire's insatiable hunger for expansion. The rest, the old, the weak, the defiant, were simply erased, their names and histories wiped from the slate, transformed into another grim warning. And every conquest, every city brought to its knees fed the next. Gold plundered, oxen seized, grain harvested, people enslaved. All flowed back to Nineveh, fueling the engine of expansion, greasing the gears of its insatiable war machine. Even the civilian administration within Nineveh itself mirrored the military's chilling precision. Taxation, record-keeping, and even the methods of torture were standardized, codified, and refined. Executioners weren't impulsive brutes. They were trained professionals, their gruesome craft executed with detached efficiency. Scribes with their ever-present clay tablets documented everything, down to the precise number of victims impaled in a given month, a meticulous accounting of terror. This was not random violence born of a fleeting rage. This was systematic. It was calculated. It was a machine of war designed with cold, bureaucratic precision to never stop. And while the ancient world watched in horrified fascination, the empire of Nineveh grew, swallowing all in its path. But what kind of society, what kind of people could possibly survive, let alone thrive, inside such a relentlessly brutal machine? Who could endure, day after day, under a regime where mercy was not just weakness but a dangerous heresy, and surveillance was a constant, suffocating shadow? To truly comprehend this paradox, we must venture beyond the thunder of the war drums and the blood-soaked battlefield. We need to look behind the imposing palace gates, into the rigid, meticulously constructed, and terrifyingly efficient layers of Ninevite society itself. What twisted social fabric held this empire of fear together? Nineveh was not a society of chaos. It was a pyramid built on order, fear, and silence. Every citizen had a place, and every place had its price. At the top stood the king, not merely a ruler but a divine extension of the gods. His word was law, his cruelty sacred. Below him were priests, generals, and scribes, each a cog in the engine of control. They didn't just enforce rules, they shaped minds. The children of nobles were taught not just reading and math, but siege tactics and interrogation methods. Torture wasn't hidden from the young, it was formal education. Loyalty wasn't earned, it was extracted. Slaves and prisoners formed the base of society, exploited, humiliated, and discarded. Women were categorized by class. Noble wives wore Persian silk and sipped wine, while conquered queens were paraded naked through the streets. Daughters of rebellion were trafficked or worse, sacrificed. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect was how normalized it all became. Denunciation was virtue. Spying on your neighbor was survival. Fear wasn't an emotion, it was a social code. And above all, questioning authority meant extinction, not just for you but for your bloodline, 3 generations erased for a single act of defiance. This was indoctrination at scale. It wasn't just that people followed orders, they believed them. They had to. In a world where even a glance could cost your life, faith in the system wasn't optional, it was instinct. But this faith wasn't just political, it was spiritual. Because in Nineveh, obedience was not only to the king, but to the gods of blood themselves. Let's step into the temples where prayers and pain were often the same thing. In Nineveh, religion was not a path to peace, it was a theater of terror. The supreme god Asher was not a deity of love or forgiveness. He was a god of war, conquest, and dominance, and his temples reflected that. Inside, blood didn't stain the altars, it anointed them. Mass sacrifices were held during festivals. Not animals, people. Prisoners of war were offered alive, mutilated in ceremonial rhythms while priests chanted invocations. Their screams weren't interruptions to worship, they were the worship. This wasn't a distortion of faith, it was its foundation. Every victory in battle was seen as divine approval, every act of cruelty a holy duty. Even the architecture of temples told the same story. Walls adorned with scenes of torture, carvings showing divine hands guiding spears, flaying knives, and executioner blades. But religion didn't just sanctify violence. It orchestrated it. Priests were gatekeepers of time itself, dictating planting seasons, tax collections, executions. They didn't simply serve the gods, they controlled the rhythm of life and death. And within that rhythm, the gods demanded suffering. There were ranks among executioners, some trained for years, perfecting techniques that balanced pain and survival. These weren't brutes. They were theologians of torment, wearing robes of ceremony, passing their knowledge from father to son. The deeper one went into Nineveh's temples, the more obvious the truth became. Cruelty wasn't just tolerated, it was sacred. Yet despite all of this, life outside the temple didn't stop. Markets opened. Children played, music played in gardens, beauty bloomed even if it bloomed beside blood. How was that possible? Let's step into the streets of Nineveh and try to live one ordinary day in a city built on nightmares. It's almost impossible to imagine, but in Nineveh, life went on. Before the sun rose, bakers were already shaping dough. Merchants were arranging silks and spices. Children chased each other through narrow alleys, laughing beneath banners of drying skin. Horror was not hidden, it was part of the decor. This duality was Nineveh's strangest paradox. A world of unimaginable brutality wrapped in stunning beauty. Palaces gleamed with ivory and gold. Fountains murmured in lush indoor gardens. Artisans crafted delicate jewelry while executioners flayed rebels just blocks away. People adapted, they had to. In a city where death could come from a whisper, resilience became routine. Families dined beneath frescoes of conquest. Lovers met in corners once used for public punishment. Life didn't resist terror, it learned to dance with it. and in some cases thrive. The Nineveh market was one of the busiest in the ancient world. Caravans brought silk from China, gold from Egypt, spices from India. The same roads that carried prisoners also carried prosperity. Everything was for sale, even people. Slaves were auctioned beside figs and perfume. Feasts in noble homes lasted for days. Peacock stuffed with figs. Lamb in pomegranate sauce. Honeyed dates served in golden bowls. But just outside those high walls, the poor chewed on scraps, sometimes human flesh forced into rituals of humiliation. Yet the city remained orderly, efficient, alive, because Nineveh didn't just build an empire of terror. It built a society capable of normalizing it. A place where the beautiful and the barbaric weren't contradictions, they were neighbors. But Nineveh's darkest moment wasn't its cruelty. It was when it stopped being proud of it. And that moment came from the most unexpected voice, a prophet who never wanted to be there, he never wanted to go. Jonah wasn't a warrior or a revolutionary. He was a prophet, and a reluctant one at that. When God commanded him to warn Nineveh, Jonah ran, and who could blame him? He knew what awaited. The garden of heads, the flayed bodies. The screams offered as sacrifices. No sane person would volunteer to face that. So Jonah bought a ticket to the farthest city he could find, Tarsis, but fate caught him in a storm. And after 3 days inside the belly of a great fish, he emerged changed. Not fearless, but resolved. The day he stepped into Nineveh must have felt like walking into the mouth of hell, 3 days just to cross the city on foot. Everywhere eyes, suspicion, silence, but Jonah didn't offer miracles. No poetry, no comfort, just 8 simple words: 40 days from now Nineveh will be destroyed. And something unthinkable happened. The king, yes, the same king who drank wine from skulls, stepped down from his throne, stripped off his robes, sat in ashes. He ordered a fast. No food, no water. Not even the animals were spared from mourning clothes. The people who once celebrated terror dropped their weapons, their tools, their pride. For the first time in history, Nineveh was silent, not in fear but in remorse. Even Jonah was confused, furious even. He wanted justice, not mercy. He waited for fire, it never came, because for a fleeting moment Nineveh changed. The beast fell asleep, the machine paused, mercy bloomed in the dust. But like all things built on fear, the transformation was fragile. Soon the old ways returned, and with them came the end. Let's witness the final days of an empire that could conquer armies but not its own nature. Empires fall. That is history's one certainty. But Nineveh's collapse was more than military defeat, it felt like cosmic retribution. It happened in 612 BC. An alliance between the Babylonians and the Medes, long oppressed and humiliated by Assyrian cruelty, united with one goal: to erase Nineveh. The siege was brutal, but what broke the city wasn't an army, it was nature. The Tigris River, Nineveh's lifeline, overflowed after heavy rains. Its furious waters eroded the foundations of the mighty walls once thought invincible. And into that breach the enemy poured in. What followed was a dark symmetry. The conquerors didn't bring mercy, they brought reflection using Nineveh's own methods: impalement, flaying, decapitations, gardens of heads. For the Assyrians, it was the mirror they had polished for centuries, now facing them. The city burned, the palaces crumbled, the scribes were silenced, the libraries turned to ash, and then Nineveh vanished. So absolute was its fall that for nearly 2,000 years the world forgot where it had even stood. Its name became legend, then rumor, then myth. Only in the 19th century did British archaeologists uncover its bones beneath modern Mosul. What they found confirmed every nightmare. Stone carvings of torture, inscriptions boasting of atrocities, temples built for pain. Was it divine justice, or the natural end of a regime built on fear? Perhaps both. Because no empire, however mighty, can outrun the weight of its sins. But even in its death, Nineveh left behind more than rubble. It left a blueprint of violence, of beauty, of administration and art. And a question that still echoes today. What do we inherit when we build our world on fear? Let's explore the fragments Nineveh left behind and what they still mean for us. For centuries, Nineveh was lost. A ghost city buried beneath layers of dust and silence. But its memory endured in scripture, in fear, in whispered warnings about power gone mad. Then archaeologists unearthed it. What they found wasn't just ruins. It was a confession carved in stone. Bas-reliefs showing rows of men impaled like fence posts. Tablets detailing torture techniques with surgical clarity. Fragments of clay boasting about conquests, executions, and enslaved populations as if they were awards. It was as though Nineveh had tried to preserve its own guilt forever, but there was more than horror. In the ruins, scholars uncovered evidence of a highly advanced society. Records of astronomical calculations, legal documents with signatures, tax codes, literature, engineering designs, even the famous irrigation system that supported the Hanging Gardens, an achievement of ecological brilliance centuries ahead of its time. The irony was bitter. This was a people who could have led the world in knowledge, in governance, in innovation. Instead, they poured that brilliance into domination. They didn't just build empires, they designed instruments of fear. And yet, their legacy shaped the future. Military strategies pioneered by the Assyrians would influence Persia, Greece, Rome. Their administrative systems inspired future empires. Their art and architecture, monumental and meticulous, set standards for awe-inspiring state propaganda. Nineveh left a mark, not just on stone but on civilization itself. And perhaps that's the most uncomfortable truth, that greatness and cruelty can coexist, that the same hand can sculpt a masterpiece and hold a blade. So what do we take from this today? Let's reflect not just on what Nineveh was, but what parts of it might still live in us. Nineveh may be ruins now, just crumbled stone and scattered dust, but its shadows are still with us. You see it in the architecture of fear, where governments monitor every citizen and power is maintained through silence. You hear it in the chants of hate, in the ceremonies that dehumanize, in the institutions that forget compassion. The mechanisms are more subtle today, but the blueprint, ancient. Nineveh taught the world that terror could be industrialized. That control could be built into culture, into law, into religion itself. And that once cruelty becomes a system, it is terrifyingly efficient. But it also taught something else, something unexpected. That even in a city built on blood, people still baked bread, children still played, musicians still wrote songs. Somewhere, even under all that horror, humanity tried to survive. And perhaps most striking of all, that a single voice, reluctant, trembling, could trigger a moment of change. However brief, however fragile. We still carry Nineveh not just in our politics or in our ruins, but in our choices. In every moment we choose power over empathy, silence over truth, convenience over justice. We echo its walls. But we also carry its lesson, that no darkness lasts forever, that repentance is possible, that even a